Hi everyone, it's Mrs. Gonzalez Clark again. We're here today to talk about multiplying a unit fraction by another unit fraction. We have a word problem that we're going to work on. We're going to use the 3-read protocol in order to help us to get a better understanding of this problem and to help us to generate some mathematical questions that have come about after reading it 3 times. So I'm going to begin with reading the problem first to you all. And after I finish reading the problem, as usual, I want you to start thinking about what is the situation in this problem? What is actually happening in this problem? Okay? So I will begin. 3/4 of Benjamin's garden is planted in vegetables. Carrots are planted in a half of the vegetable section in his garden. So I'm just going to give you guys a few moments to think about that. What's the situation going on in this problem? What is happening? Okay, great. So the situation going on is Benjamin has a garden. It's a beautiful thing to have a garden. But within this garden, he has vegetables. So some of his garden has a vegetable section. And within that vegetable section, looks like he has some carrots in there. So he has a garden. Some of that garden has vegetables, but within those vegetables, some of those vegetables are carrots. So let's move on to the second read. This is going to be our choral read. So after we finish reading it the second time, we are going to start thinking about the quantities, the amounts that are represented in this problem. So let's get ready to read together. Ready? 3/4 of Benjamin's garden is planted in vegetables. Carrots are planted in a half of the vegetable section in his garden. So again, let me give you a moment to just kind of think about the quantities that were represented within this problem. Okay, great. So some quantities that appeared in this problem after we read it were 3/4, and that 3/4 represents the part of his garden, the whole, that is filled with vegetables. And then another quantity that we read was a half. So from this 3/4 section of the whole garden, half of it is designated to carrots. So those two quantities are very important within this problem. Okay? So now we're going to do our final read. And after we're done with our final read, I want you all to start thinking about and generating some mathematical questions that come about after the third read. Okay? So let's chorally read it together. Ready? Let's go. 3/4 of Benjamin's garden is planted in vegetables. Carrots are planted in a half of the vegetable section in his garden. So I'm going to give you a few moments to just start thinking about some mathematical questions that came to your head after we completed reading it the third time. Okay, great. So some mathematical questions that came up. So one mathematical question that came up is how many carrots are planted in the garden? Okay. Another mathematical question that came up was how much of Benjamin's garden is planted with carrots? Okay, so those are two really good mathematical questions that came up after we read the problem 3 times. Okay, so now let's start to think through this and solve this problem. So let's look at the first sentence. 3/4 of Benjamin's garden is planted in vegetables. So let's look at Benjamin's garden as a whole, right? It's a whole, it's being represented as a whole, his garden. Now, 3/4 of this whole is the section that is designated towards the vegetables. So I'm going to take this whole and I'm going to break it into fourths. Okay, so here are the fourths. Now, 3/4 of this whole, 3/4 of this garden is going to be represented as vegetables. 3/4 of the whole are the vegetables. So we are going to represent that. So let me get. And I'm just going to make a quick shading in just so that we can see which parts are being represented. Oops. So that's 1/4. 2/4. 3/4. And I actually want to label each part just so that we know that it is fourths. So this is 1/4. This is a fourth. This is a fourth. And then this is a fourth as well, which in total gives us the whole. But remember, our emphasis right now is focusing on 3 of the fourths. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. 3/4 altogether. So this here represents the vegetables. This is the veg section. Okay, we're just going to call it the veg. Okay, so these 3/4 represent the vegetables. So we have represented the first sentence of our problem. 3/4 of Benjamin's garden is planted in vegetables. Okay, so now let's look at the second sentence. Carrots are planted in a half of the vegetable section in his garden. So here is his vegetable section. Half of this vegetable section is going to be for carrots only. So I'm going to cut the vegetable section in half, cut the garden in half so that we can see what component of the 3/4 of the vegetable garden is designated to carrots. So I'm going to cut it in half. Okay, so half of the vegetable section in his garden is going to be carrots, right? So half is going to be this part. And I'm just going to shade it so that you can see. Sorry about that. Okay. So this is half of the vegetable garden, right? So the vegetable garden was 3/4, and we took it and we split it in half. Okay, so that means in these three sections here, these are carrots. There are carrots in these three sections. Okay, so I'm just going to actually put carrots. I'm going to put C on top of them so that we know that these three parts are carrots. Okay, so let's just go back and review our questions. So how many carrots are planted in the garden? And then our second question was how much of Benjamin's garden is planted with carrots? Now, based off of the information we have here, we can answer that question. We can answer this question because looking at the model, the section here that has been double shaded is the section that represents the vegetable garden, but more specifically, the section of the vegetable garden that only have carrots. So 3 of those parts have the carrots. In total, there are 8 parts altogether in the garden. So that means since there's 8 total parts, that is our denominator because the denominator represents the total amount of parts, equal parts in the whole. And then the numerator represents the parts that we have. And in this case, it's 3/8. So how much of Benjamin's garden is planted with carrots? 3/8 of his garden is planted with carrots. So our first question, how many carrots are planted in the garden? That's kind of hard to answer at this point because we don't know how many vegetables were in the actual garden. We only know the fractional parts of the garden that actually had vegetables, but we don't know the exact quantity of each vegetable in each section. So this is an amazing question, but we need a little bit more information in order to answer that. However, we did answer the main component of the problem, which is how much of Benjamin's garden is planted with carrots. So what we did is we took 2 unit fractions and we multiplied it. We didn't even use a multiplication sign. We were able to use a model to show how we were able to get the amount that we needed.